do some, I guess, thinking about layouts for children's books. So this is my storyboard, and I'm working on this project currently. So I wrote and illustrated a picture book that I will hopefully be pitching as a full book dummy where I'm author illustrator of it. So this is one of those things I know, it's like anything. It's like when you work as a children's book author or illustrator, you're just kind of pitching things and seeing if they land right or not. So I wrote the story, but and this went through numerous with myself and my critique group. Basically revisions with the text, but then also on my own, I'm problem solving how the images are working together. And so what I love about storyboarding is that you get an entire view snapshot of the entire book and how does it flow all together. It's important to to me, it's important to know that having the storyboard, besides doing thumbnails and thinking about each image separately, but how do they work in the whole course of the story? Are things moving forward? Also, do you have a combination of spreads, full page, and spot illustrations? And it kind of helps break up, the visual interest of the storytelling. But some stories work really great with just all full spreads. So it's all depending on you. I am using my favorite gel pen. So I have just a piece of paper, my gel pens, and then I'm gonna go over some things that I consider whenever I'm making a storyboard, and I'm thumbnailing. But this is really in terms of not so much thumbnailing the ideas for a story, individual illustrations. This is about how I'm thinking about sequentially, like how I'm breaking up those illustrations, full spreads, spots, and how I'm going to push the story along using those different types of units of illustration, I guess. Building blocks of like creating this book. So anyway, let's talk about what a spread is. And so I'm just doing this just so people can understand. So it's always nice to have some basic terminology that we share. And these are just basic ones that I picked up from working in-house as a graphic designer. And this was what I would call my thumbnail because it's about the size of your thumb. That's what I tell students. So I drew this line because this is my gutter. And by the way, this is considered a spread. We have 2 pages that are facing each other. Sometimes they're facing pages, so you might see that, facing pages. And I forget, there are specific terms for this is the right and this is a left. They have fancy names, but I always just, and I think they're Latin, but anyways, this is that there's a right hand and there's a left hand page. Beyond that, there's a live area. So generally, we want to keep anything important in this live area. General rule was about a ½ an inch from this edge of where the paper is trimmed off. You also want to avoid the gutter because the way the book folds, obviously, you're gonna lose some things in there. So yeah. The next thing is this is your trim. So the actual physical dimensions of your book, and you might, if you've ever looked at like self-publishing, a lot of those companies will have these dimensions, so this can be helpful if you aren't sure about how that works. But they're gonna say like this is your actual physical size of your book when everything's cut off. They have these gigantic guillotine cutters. Once again, when I was teaching and they had a graphic design program at the high school I was at, we actually had a guillotine cutter. It was really cool. I mean, it's like, whoa, you could lose a finger in that thing. But yeah, it's just like this big, huge blade. And so as the pages are put and stacked together, huge stacks, and then they're just cut all at one time. And that's why we give this spacing here, because it's never going to always cut exactly the same, because it's a big stack of paper, and so there's always like a little bit of wiggle. So having that 1/2 inch from the edge gives you that safety that something's not going to get cut out. So beyond the trim, there is something called your bleed. Okay, so if this is where the guillotine cutter is cutting that stack of paper, this is your bleed. This is, say you have an illustration that goes all the way to the edge, and that basically allows that there not end up being the white of the paper, or whatever the color of the paper is, leaving like a little white strip or anything. You have it going beyond that. The bleed is usually 1.25 all the way around. Some people might ask you to do more. I've heard some people ask for a 1/2 inch bleed. I always give lots of bleed because of the way I work as a cut paper artist. Like, I always want extra, like, because I might move or shift the camera around, or maybe I move something and it's like maybe a 1/4 inch off and I didn't catch it when I was taking the photograph. I could always digitally move things, but it's always nice having that extra safety so I can just have that wiggle room. So with that said, there are lots of different ways that you can break up your page layout of a book. And so I'm kind of tied already into the way I've already kind of broken up my pages between these circle spots and then full page and then spreads as well. So I kind of want to, what I'm thinking about fixing, because I no longer, like, I did this spread here and I'm like, oh, this is a huge problem for me because I work in paper and I cut and I go like, oh, it's so tiny in the back. I don't know how, I feel like that is going to be an issue for readability. Like, I build these little dummies of things and they're pretty rough. I mean, this is just me figuring things out, like the scale of things. So I figured out the scale of what I want this couch, and I just go like, oh my goodness, like that thing is like, she's gonna be really small. I don't know, it just, you can fudge it, but I go like, I feel like this is already gonna be a problem. I spot that now once I did this piece, because I knew this was gonna be the hardest thing to build in the scene. I don't also like, I like that this pushes depth, having the kitchen further in, but I worry that, here's the problem. I got a wall here, I have a wall here. When you have walls and you work in 3D cut paper, I was like, oh man, it's gonna cast a shadow. Like, how am I gonna light this and not have some really not good shadows? So there's, like, I like shadows, don't get me wrong, but too big as shadows covering things, I think that's a huge problem. So I want to avoid that for now. I mean, other people who are further along in this technique probably figured all that out, but I do worry about how that's going to work out. I mean, I could overhead light it, but I don't know. I just feel like where I light it from here, but I do feel like it's going to cause me problems, and I think yeah, I just feel like it's going to cause me major problems because after building that piece. So now it's like, let's go back to the drawing board. So, like I said, this isn't really about me thinking about the actual individual images inside. This is more about me problem solving, how I can break up the actual space for illustrations. And so in the past I had those circles, so maybe I know I have, so going back to the storyboard again, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so 7. Yeah, 7 is the magic number for this character going through the scene where she's picking up different items, and so I'm just thinking about how I can get those 7 things in. See, I feel like it's really tough because I've got this gutter here and I've got to avoid it, so I'm thinking a longer illustration. So maybe there's the character, and so like this is just rough because I'm just thinking about like organizational stuff. I think sometimes when we get into those itty bitty details, it just gets to be overwhelming. So if I start doing this, I think I can focus a little bit better. So I'll do another one. But like I said, this is very quick. I use a pen because I feel like I have to put it down. You know, you can always do digitally. It just depends on your personal preference. So maybe I go with paneling, but I didn't really do any rectangles, so I doubt that's going to work necessarily, but I do like the idea of using those to kind of help me think out how I can bring up. Oh yeah, so I need to break that in half because I needed 7, right? So it could be comic book like. I don't know that I like that either. So it's really going through every possibility of what fits my story in terms of layout. Not even, I don't really care what's, I care what goes in there, but it's like, I'm just thinking about, I kind of know from writing and illustrating it that, how much space that illustration might take up. So it's really thinking about how I can break up a page. Just kind of the opposite of that. Okay. And I suppose once you do this, you can always reference this later on, and then you'll have something to go back to and be like, oh, I have all these little layout ideas, potential, and I can always go back and be like, oh, let me try plugging this in. Yeah, so maybe it just goes across like that, and then I have the character going through their little deal. Actually, with this one, I'll move on into maybe. Well, actually, let me do this again. So, same with there. I know, this is just like the circle is the character. I'm just thinking about. We can have it just literally break the space up into 4. I also have to think about the text. I don't know. So here's another idea. Maybe it's like an overview. Maybe there's space around it, and maybe it's the entire room. And there's these little arrows indicating where the character is in the space. It's kind of confusing. I think if somebody works digitally, like instead of the way I work, I think you have a little bit more freedom in terms of, like, I work in cut paper, so it's like I feel like you kind of have to physically, like, put it in a box in a way, because otherwise it like kind of breaks that feeling. I feel like of what I want the person to feel like they're looking into this little peephole, into this little window, and so of this world. And I feel like I don't know, fuzzing up the edges or like blending it together in some ways that some digital illustrators work, it doesn't, I don't know. So it's always, yeah, thinking about how I can create that but still make it feel like it's this magical world that's miniature. So anyways, so I feel like I need some kind of container to put in it. And I think though I need to still stick with this because these are not going to work because I didn't use really any rectangles. I do kind of like breaking this up but keeping those circles. So, I don't know, like maybe more simplified, maybe character twice in the scene, and then character once. Actually, so I feel like, yeah, creating these peepholes of like in these worlds. 1, 2, 3, 4. She exits. Shirt things. Twice in this scene, and once in this scene with the dog. And okay, so thinking, always thinking. So thinking earlier at this stage usually saves you from going back, and I feel like I didn't do this as much, and so you learn from your mistakes. So, you know, I got to the point where I storyboarded, I thought it was gonna work, and then I'm like, oh, build the mock-up, it's not gonna work. But at least I didn't get to the point where I painted everything and cut it out. That's what I've learned, is like, it's a very reiterative process of going through and sandboxing and thinking things out. So even with this, I'm thinking about how am I going to tie these in. I mean, there is text. I think I want to... I think I want some footprints. And I kind of want to vary these sizes up a little bit more. I feel like that could be smaller. I'll try again. So, sewing box. Grab the sewing box. Then she's thinking about scarf for mom. Dad. It's a bigger one. The dog could be smaller. Her and the dog. Her shirt and leaving. Shirt. And then exits out of the scene. I feel like I want something to tie this all together. I mean, I've got text as well, so the text. Before I had it overlaid on the illustration, I think I want the text on the side here. With that said, I think it'd be fun to somehow get some footprints. So this could be little footprints, kind of directing, and and even the little, because she has a pet dog, so that could be fun. Here, and then the footprints could go across the gutter, and maybe go off. So this, I feel like, possibly has more potential. Maybe it's the one getting us started, maybe it's this, then it's this. So varying the sizes of these circles to create a little bit more visual interest. Then I have the medium, and then I have the largest size. So it's that whole idea of creating that variety, and then I can still have like the footprints going here, footprints going here, footprints going here, and then footprints going down here. So yeah, and to be honest, like, this is my second pass at this, so it's like this constant reiterative process and thinking through. Like, after the second page of this, I'm actually come up with a better solution that I like, that I didn't have previously. So this, but with that said, I've got to figure out, like, because I only have the footprints on this one spread, I don't know, it's kind of a little bit distracting. Also, this would be a huge no-no in any Asian household, like leaving footprints in your house. Like, that's like, you know, that would be, yeah, I would get so yelled at for this when I was a kid. But I feel like it would be fun to incorporate in the story. And on a smaller level, I know from looking at the storyboard, I have places where I could possibly add those footprints as a little like giveaway. Like I could do it here on the title page, maybe add some footprints here in this back page, which has since changed. And maybe even on these little, I mean, I don't know. See, and these are things that I hadn't thought about, but with the thumbnailing and like going over things, I literally draw over things. Or maybe if it's not the footprint, so here's sandboxing in, could it be something with sewing, because the story has to deal with sewing. So maybe it's like this thread. Maybe it's just a thread. Maybe it's a spool. I think that makes more sense. Like, so this could be this line of thread with a spool at the end of it. So I'm going to have to do more thinking on it and then redraw this and figure out, because yeah, I don't really have the footprints in there, and I go like, though those are cute though, I really, and I'll probably use this somewhere else. So like, I always keep my ideas handy, be like, oh, I didn't use that, I can use that later. So I think the whole thread, which kind of is a spool of thread with the thread, and I love this idea of making this 3D, and that thread goes through back of the illustrations, and I think that ties them better because I used a bobbin and some thread on the pattern in the very back. So that's why storyboarding and all of this is so helpful. I highly recommend it. I hope that's helpful for you guys, and good luck with your illustrations. Bye.